Pay close attention to what I'm about to tell you and close all other tabs, because your financial future strictly depends on the next few minutes. Immediately discard the idea that this video is mere speculation, theory, or a cheap retention tactic. The data I present proves mathematically and irrefutably that the market implosion has already begun. While the average investor panicked in the last week of February 2026, hypnotized by headlines about the Middle East, smart money executed a brutal escape. The giant BHP closed a massive $4.3 billion deal with Wheaton Precious Metals, securing exclusive access to real physical silver until 2036. They are not buying paper derivatives. They are draining physical wealth before the system enters a death spiral. The mainstream media and so-called financial experts absolutely refuse to report on the evaporation of liquidity occurring beneath our feet. Between February 18th and 20th, we witnessed severe and abnormal spikes in silver leasing rates in London, a phenomenon completely ignored by television news. Worse than that, the market entered a deep state of backwardation, where the price of the metal for immediate delivery aggressively surpassed futures contracts on the famous COMEX exchange. Banks and large dealers are paying astronomical premiums, desperate for immediate physical deliveries, simply because the actual metal does not exist in the absurd quantities that the derivatives market dares to suggest. This is the real systemic trap closing in, an illusion of wealth based on empty contracts that now violently collides with harsh physical reality. To further aggravate this terrifying scenario, the Federal Reserve has just confessed to its own loss of control. The FOMC minutes released this week completely shattered the comforting narrative that inflation is under control, revealing a deeply fractured committee adrift. Add to that the ongoing lethal geopolitical strangulation, with 2 American aircraft carriers positioned in the Middle East, and coordinated naval exercises between Russia and Iran, threatening 20% of the global oil supply in the Strait of Hormuz. What you are about to hear right now is the detailed and surgical anatomy of an inevitable financial collapse, an event that will reduce the wealth of the unwary to dust. You need to understand the mechanics of this catastrophe before institutional escape routes are locked forever. To understand the sheer gravity of this precise historical moment, you need to swallow the red pill about how the global financial market truly operates in its darkest corners. The entire foundation of the world's precious metals trade is underpinned by a structurally rotten mechanism, known to insiders as the fractional reserve commodity system. Imagine the central piping of a massive skyscraper designed to withstand the water pressure of just one floor, but which suddenly needs to supply 100 floors simultaneously. That's exactly what giant exchanges like COMEX and LBMA have quietly built over decades. For every ounce of physical silver that actually rests in their registered vaults, there are dozens of purely phantom ounces being traded in paper contracts. This financial architecture is a gigantic and fragile chain of completely illusory guarantees. This vast illusion of security perceived by the public is rapidly evaporating before our startled eyes. When we simultaneously witness stratospheric peaks in lease rates and the dreaded scenario of backwardation, the structural fire alarms begin to sound deafeningly. Under normal and healthy conditions, the system financially rewards those who store the metal in the vault and sell futures contracts for the long term. However, this mechanical logic has been brutally reversed. The main gear has broken. The natural incentive to keep the silver locked within the traditional system has simply evaporated, forcing a true systemic short circuit. Institutional participants suddenly realize that the musical chair has stopped playing, and there are not enough physical seats for all leveraged investors. The current rush to secure the real asset reveals that the once unquestionable and abundant structural liquidity was nothing more than a dangerous statistical mirage. The real implosion, however, will be triggered on the other side of the world, crushing the fragile Western hegemony. The derivatives market in New York and London is losing, in real time, absolute control over the pricing of real and tangible assets. Institutional whales and nation-states of the East, led by voracious and relentless Chinese demand, no longer accept the financial liquidation of their positions. Paper money has lost its illusory allure. They demand the raw, heavy, and immediate physical delivery of the asset. If the Shanghai Gold Exchange opens its operations tomorrow, printing a premium of $20 to $50 above the London spot price, we will witness irreversible collapse. This insane price differential will instantly trigger a relentless algorithmic arbitrage machine, draining the physical blood of Western stock exchanges like a colossal and lethal parasite connected to the main financial artery. Imagine the surgical precision and devastating effect of thousands of heavy dominoes falling in a mathematical sequence that is absolutely impossible to stop. Highly capitalized institutional arbitrageurs will buy cheap and abundant futures contracts in New York, only to immediately demand the physical delivery of this undervalued metal. Then they will transport and sell this same physical silver in Shanghai, pocketing astronomical and completely risk-free profits on the difference in premiums charged. This predatory cycle will function like a giant industrial vacuum cleaner, mercilessly sucking up every remaining bar of metal in the depleted Western vaults. The arbitrage machine feels no pity, doesn't read optimistic central bank statements, and doesn't respect sovereign borders. It simply blindly obeys the natural law of capital flows, transferring the tangible wealth of the West's broken fractional system directly into the eager hands of Asian buyers. This is where the systemic trap reveals itself to be mathematically insurmountable for the big players on Wall Street. As we rapidly approach the infamous first notice day in March, the basic equation of supply and demand collapses completely and utterly. It is mathematically impossible for the once all-powerful COMEX exchange to satisfy sustained and coordinated demand from Asia without completely depleting its already dwindling reserves of registered silver. The structural pressure exerted on the clearinghouses will push the exchange's operational limits into a dark abyss of liquidity. The gatekeepers of the paper market are now trapped in a terrifying dead end, forced to admit that they operated a gigantic scheme of empty promises. The cold, brutal mathematics of physical deliveries will permanently shatter the fragile glass ceiling that has always protected the bankrupt derivatives market. The end result of this unprecedented structural breakdown will be a violent and cataclysmic short squeeze that will disintegrate entire fortunes overnight. Large institutional banks, which have spent decades short-selling and manipulating the price of silver downwards with synthetic contracts, will be brutally crushed against the wall. When the relentless obligation of physical delivery knocks on their armored doors, they will be forced to cover their leveraged positions by buying at whatever exorbitant price the physical market dictates. This self-perpetuating death spiral will cause the price of the real asset to skyrocket uncontrollably, leaving a trail of financial carnage in the portfolios of those who blindly trusted the television. What the media arrogantly calls a conspiracy theory is, in fact, the exact mechanics of the largest wealth transfer ever recorded in contemporary history. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of this systemic trap closing in around us, you need to examine the cold, irrefutable historical evidence. We are not heading towards an unprecedented scenario. We are reliving, in a grim and almost surgical way, the exact and terrifying pattern of the 1979 and and 1980s. In that dark era, we witnessed the financial plumbing clogging in a manner identical to today. We had a desperate Federal Reserve blindly fighting rampant inflation, led at the time by the iron fist of Paul Volcker. Simultaneously, the world watched a deadly geopolitical crisis with hostages in Iran and real threats in the Middle East, violently inflating the price of oil. Red warning lights flashed aggressively on the control panels of the global economy, warning of the imminent evaporation of liquidity that would destroy the wealth of anyone who believed in the false calm. That period culminated in the famous and devastating short squeeze of the silver market, aggressively orchestrated by the Hunt brothers. They perceived the gigantic fissure in the derivatives market and demanded the delivery of the physical metal, breaking the backbones of Wall Street. The ruthless logic that prevailed there is exactly the same that suffocates us today. It happened before. The mechanical signs of the catastrophe were identical, and all those who ignored the harsh reality lost absolutely everything. However, there is a brutal and frightening difference in the scale of this new systemic collapse. Today, the imminent implosion is not being caused by just two ambitious Texan billionaires aggressively trying to corner Western stock exchanges. The driving force that will crack the liquidity structure in two is immensely larger, more coordinated, and infinitely more lethal for the fragile, indebted Western economy. What we are facing head-on, without any governmental protection, is the overwhelming force of the sovereign axis of the East, strategically led by the aggressive People's Bank of China. Added to this is an insatiable physical demand from its gigantic population, which has already fully grasped the end of the West's fiduciary illusion. In 1980, the rules of the game had to be brutally altered overnight to save the big bankers from total liquidation and absolute bankruptcy. Monetary authorities desperately tried to contain the immense volatility by spreading false narratives and applying draconian credit restrictions against those who dared to challenge the paper-based matrix. However, the tricks of the past will no longer work against the military and financial power of nation-states that refuse submission and demand the immediate and unconditional surrender of gold and silver. At this very moment, we watch in bewilderment as regulators enter the very same phase of blind despair and denial that precedes the greatest economic disruptions in human history. They attempt, through empty pronouncements from the mainstream corporate media, to contain overwhelming volatility using only fraudulent fiduciary narratives and reassuring lies. The fact is, unlike the flexible derivative system where trillions can be digitally invented out of thin air, metal cannot be printed or cloned by suited bureaucrats. The inexorable and immutable mathematics of physical deliveries, just as it so destructively occurred at the dawn of 1980, will fatally shatter the glass ceiling of the synthetic market once and for all. This pattern is irrefutable, and the clock has already begun ticking for those who hold their hard-earned wealth hostage to this systemic plumbing fatally compromised by greed and arrogance. We have now arrived at the terrifying epicenter of this unprecedented crisis, where you need to understand why the supposed saviors of the economy have their hands completely tied. Forget the illusions sold by newspapers that governments, large central banks, or trillion-dollar corporations have an ace up their sleeve to rescue the system this time. The government rescue machine was built exclusively to print paper and inject digital digits into a purely fiduciary system. When the short circuit occurs in the physical and structural base of the metals, the entire Federal Reserve money printer becomes a pathetic and useless tool. You can't use quantitative easing to materialize silver bars out of thin air. The institutional trap is perfectly set because the current collapse demands tangible liquidity that the suited bureaucrats don't control and can't simply falsify in their doctored accounting balances. At this precise and decisive historical moment, the Western financial system finds itself trapped in a suffocating and agonizing struggle between a rock and a hard place. The central bank is cornered in a lethal mathematical dilemma where any strategic move it attempts will result in immediate systemic catastrophe. If they decide to intervene to save the derivatives desks and large, failing institutions by further tightening interest rates, they will implode the fragile real economy, triggering an overwhelming wave of corporate bankruptcies and mass unemployment. On the other hand, if they capitulate and return to printing money recklessly to cover the gigantic margins demanded by the COMEX exchange, they will irreversibly destroy the purchasing power of the fiat currency itself. There is no longer an easy way out, only terrible choices that accelerate the death spiral and strangle the ordinary citizen who naively trusts the system. Any desperate attempt by the system to mask or resolve this breakdown in the chain of guarantees will only serve to add fuel to an already out-of-control fire. Imagine the devastating impact of trillions of newly printed counterfeit dollars desperately trying to chase down a supply of physical silver and gold that has already been drained by Eastern powers and smart money whales. The mechanical result of this insane operation is not market stabilization, but rather the ignition of rampant, hyperbolic inflation that will devour the middle class in a matter of weeks. By attempting to bail out banks trapped on the wrong side of synthetic bets, governments will effectively be sacrificing their currency and their sovereign future. The attempt to plug the hole of real metal shortage with more paper only proves to the world that the structure has completely collapsed. When the printing press fails to resolve the physical bottleneck, the state's next inevitable weapon is bureaucratic terrorism, materialized in the form of violent capital controls. Instead of admitting the structural bankruptcy of their fractional reserve banking, the authorities will suddenly change the rules of the game in the middle of the night to protect their institutional partners. You will see the system's plumbing deliberately shut down, prohibiting bank withdrawals, restricting currency conversion, and forcing metal exchanges to liquidate all contracts purely in devalued paper money. They will declare a state of financial emergency to prevent the general public from fleeing to safe, tangible havens. This is exactly how the system reacts when it finds itself cornered and about to bleed to death. It freezes your assets and imprisons your money in a digital pen with no safe escape route. The stark, brutal, and terrifying truth that the mainstream media will never reveal is that the collapse has already been silently accepted by the global elite who orchestrated this disaster. Mega corporations and central banks are no longer trying to fix the blown engine of a plane in freefall. They are simply securing the only physical parachutes available on the market. While you are bombarded with reassuring narratives that inflation is transient and that banking institutions are rock solid, they are frantically accumulating real gold and silver. They are perfectly aware that the fiat mechanism will suffer an uncontrollable implosion very soon, and they have carefully designed this institutional trap so that you, the unsuspecting and blind retail investor, serve as the last layer of exit liquidity before the veil of false prosperity definitively tears over your head. The time has come for your reward for having the courage to see the stark truth up to this point, abandoning the herd to the slaughter. The relentless binary scenario dictated by China's economic reopening offers incredibly clear windows of opportunity for you to act with precision before global despair sets in. Your first asymmetrical move, the absolute defense of your assets, requires the immediate removal of counterparty risk. The only real protection against the inevitable catastrophic failure of the COMEX and LBMA exchange delivery mechanism is the private and anonymous custody of physical gold and silver. keep your real assets strictly outside the traditional banking system and the clutches of the state. When the gigantic paper market machine grinds to a halt and collapses, the premium on tangible currencies and bars will skyrocket, forever decoupling from the spot price displayed on the deceitful screens. Your second asymmetrical move is a frontal and tactical attack against the blindness of the Western financial system, focusing on powerful time zone arbitrage. Your target is the surgical window of Sunday night and Monday morning, following the time zone of the United States Eastern Coast. This is the exact moment when the devastating overnight session of the Shanghai Gold Exchange awakens to devour global liquidity. If the SGE premium prints a value above $25 in the first 30 minutes of intense trading, the red alert has been triggered. Watch closely if the open interest on silver on the Shanghai Exchange simultaneously increases, as this confirms that Eastern institutional money is activating annihilation mode. You need to position yourself ruthlessly before the Western herd awakens to the absolute and inevitable systemic nightmare. Your third and final asymmetrical move is the lethal and calculated execution of this escape and enrichment plan amidst the carnage and structural chaos. With Shanghai indicators confirming the bleeding of physical metal, the counter-movement is to go long on short-term futures contracts or highly leveraged exchange-traded funds. Your entry window closes ruthlessly before 9:30 a.m. on Tuesday, the moment the opening bells ring in New York. By doing so, you are effectively executing a brilliant algorithmic front-running, anticipating the massive demand shock even before the robots and Wall Street elites can fully price it into the opening gap. Turn this liquidity evaporation into the biggest and safest wealth transfer of your financial life. The financial collapse I've just mapped out with surgical precision for you isn't an isolated event ending this fateful week. The implosion of the derivatives market and the evaporation of systemic liquidity form a continuous, violent, and relentless process that will devour the assets of the unwary month after month. It's precisely for this grim reason that I'm not here to ask for a simple, useless like on the video, as the vast majority of shallow and anesthetized content creators do. I demand that you subscribe to this channel right now, transforming it into your headquarters for financial intelligence and real-time tactical survival. The fractional share system will continue to bleed uncontrollably, and you'll need a relentless radar to monitor each domino falling silently before the mainstream media decides to confess to the catastrophe that already completely surrounds us. The gears of the systemic trap spin relentlessly fast in the underworld of high finance, and the rules of the survival game will be brutally altered in the dead of night by suited bureaucrats. By securing your immediate registration and activating all security notifications, you guarantee your exclusive place in our trench of vigilant sentinels against disinformation. While mainstream media and television news continue to spew reassuring and utterly mendacious narratives about central bank control, we will continue to dissect the obscure reports and expose the glaring fractures of the Western economy. Being registered here is not just about consuming content on geopolitics and economics. It is a vital act of strategic self-preservation in the face of the largest and most silent theft of tangible wealth ever orchestrated by global elites against the financially blind working population. The death spiral has already been triggered in the empty coffers of the COMEX exchange, and institutional money will continue to flee to physical assets at any exorbitant cost. However, the real war to preserve your hard-earned wealth requires us to form a cohesive, vigilant, and perfectly informed community about the stark reality on the streets. It is crucial that we cross-reference the data from major reports with the real temperature of the collapse that is already violently knocking at your door. Therefore, I need you to go down to the comments section now and contribute to our ongoing intelligence network, sharing your frontline perspective. We are not mere passive spectators watching the implosion of our currency. We are the strategists anticipating every dirty trick the state will try to pull to confiscate our private capital. I want to know exactly this from you. Faced with this undeniable breakdown of the chain of guarantees and the imminent threat of capital controls, what steps have you already taken outside the traditional banking system? Have you already started protecting your portfolio by converting your fragile fiat currencies into physical and untouchable assets? Or do you still blindly trust that your bank manager has the answers to save your money from evaporating? Please explain in detail in the comments what your main tangible defense strategy is against rampant inflation and the mechanical collapse of Western stock markets. The debate generated below will serve as a valuable tactical laboratory for all members of this insider community who refuse to be crushed by the collective ignorance carefully orchestrated by the same central banks that destroyed the world. The glass ceiling of the derivatives market is cracking deafeningly under the immense pressure exerted by the sovereign axis of the East, and you can no longer turn back. The systemic short circuit in the delivery of silver and gold is not a distant, theoretical prediction. It is the relentless, mathematical reality tearing the fabric of the global economy at this very terrifying moment. Share this red alert immediately with that family member or business partner who still believes in the empty promises of the government and the illusory security of paper contracts. The time for comfortable preparations has completely run out. We are now operating strictly in survival mode and surgical strike mode against institutional failure. Stay on high alert, keep your real assets hidden from the state, and await my next intelligence instructions.